today we're going to be talking about how authors make their money, which I feel like is a very hush-hush sort of topic, just because it's so different for everyone. It fluctuates a lot with how people make their money. It's a very, very wide range when it comes to money making in the author space. I really just kind of want to talk about two major routes to consider when we're talking about authors making money. The first one is going to be advances, and the second one is going to be royalties. And like any kind of topic or subject, there are going to be exceptions and special cases, so I'm going to do my best to try to give consideration to those as well. Hi there, my name is Lauren, and I am a book strategist as well as a traditionally published author. So I kind of have a couple unique perspectives on a lot of these things that I talk about when it comes to book publishing specifically. I have the strategic side where I've helped launch Amazon and Wall Street Journal best-selling books, as well as personal knowledge of how the traditional publishing space works. So I try to combine both of those perspectives to create a very well-rounded, comprehensive approach to a lot of these questions and subjects that I feel like are lesser talked about when it comes to aspiring authorship. I want to provide insight, advice, commentary, and education for those of you out there, for you specifically, with helping you to publish a book, because there's so much content out there around how to write a book. But I feel like the ultimate goal for everyone is publication, and I just don't hear so much dialogue around that. It's always like how to write a query letter, how to pitch to an agent. But there's very, very little content, I feel like, around how publishing actually works and just the kinds of dynamics in culture and dialogue around very specific and niche pieces in the book publishing space. So that's really kind of the point of everything that I do here. And now that I think about it, I don't feel like I've ever truly introduced myself in that way. So if you're new or if you're existing, I hope that makes sense and it resonates with you. Let's just dive right into how the heck authors make their money, shall we? Let's just not waste any time. I'm excited to talk about this. Okay, so like I mentioned, there's really two major routes that I'm going to be talking about for how authors make their money. The first one being advances. That's what I'm going to dive into first. The big question, the most important one, is what the heck are advances? And in short, it's basically a chunk of money that your publisher gives you before your book is published. And before I forget, I'm going to add that a lot of the focus around this is going to be on more traditional publishing. I'm going to try to throw in a few bits here and there about hybrid and self-publishing, but for the most part, the focus is going to be on traditional publishing because that's where advances are the most relevant. Hybrid publishing and self-publishing do not offer advances, mostly because you are taking on a lot of the financial risk. You're basically paying for your book to get published, whether you're doing it through an agency or getting support through like a third-party business, which is very typical for hybrid publishing. There's hybrid presses out there, but there's usually you can almost think of it as like a down payment, for example, and oftentimes you don't always make back the money that you put in. So just do your research, use caution if that's something that's of interest to you. And then with self-publishing, you're in charge of everything. You're paying for everything. All of the weight and responsibilities on your shoulders. It's like a DIY book publishing thing. So it makes sense that advances are not really a part of the equation when you're doing hybrid or self-publishing, but it can be if you're traditional publishing. And even though you don't get advances with hybrid and self typically, you do in exchange get a higher profit margin. This is pretty indicative of how successful a publisher thinks your book is going to be. So the higher the potential, the bigger the check, basically. This typically happens around the time where you get signed with a publisher, you're signing the contract, you're going through negotiations, your rights, kind of how, you're kind of working out the logistics of what this kind of partnership between you and a publisher is going to look like. The purpose of an advance is that your publisher thinks your book is going to do relatively well. What that means and what those standards are, I don't know. That's particular to the kind of publisher and the books that they publish and the trends that are going around and the kinds of books that are being published and your platform and what your book is about. There's so many factors to consider when it comes to how successful your book is going to be, whether from your perspective or the publisher's perspective. Your advance is going to vary depending on your status. And I hate to use the word status just because it sounds so it just sounds a little bit dehumanizing. But a lot of it has to do with your influence, really, which is why a lot of these celebrities and influencers get bigger checks and bigger book deals and bigger publicity campaigns versus no-name debut authors like your homegirl here, which is fine. I don't take offense to that. It's just how the business works, which is a very important frame of mindset to have when we're talking about book publishing, is that, like anything, books are a business and money is going to be involved. And when it comes to how big your advance is going to be, that initial check that a publisher may or may not give you, it depends on a lot of things. It's so hard to say, how big it's going to be. It's dependent on the timing, it's dependent on what trends are going around, your platform, and sometimes just plain luck. Because it's sort of like a case of like the chicken and the egg, because books inform trends, but trends also inform books. And so it's just on loop, and it's just a matter of how well can you hop on top of the carousel ride, basically. So let's dive a little bit more into the specifics. So I recently read a book called Scratch by Manula Martin. I apologize if I mispronounce the name. But it's basically a collection of essays from authors with varying degrees of success. And one of the first ones featured there that I really liked, I think it was like the first or second essay in the book that is the compilation of essays, Cheryl Strayed talked about how the money worked for her. And what I really appreciated about her submission or her story or essay is how transparent she was with the money, because like I said, it's a very hush-hush kind of topic. And she said that before she published her very, very famous book, Wild, which is now a major motion picture, she was tens of thousands of dollars in credit card debt. She and her husband, her family, they were. Upon her book, Wild, getting acquired by an imprint of Knopf, which is a very well-known publisher, she learned that she would be getting a $100,000 advance, which is massive. And she and her husband were absolutely convinced that, oh my God, all of our problems are going to disappear. We're going to get back on track. We're going to have our life together. We might even have some extra cash to spare. This is great. Except the thing is, she didn't get it all at once. And that was kind of the little bit that surprised her about getting such a big advance. Her $100,000 advance actually came to her in 4 installments of $25,000 each. She got the first one upon signing the contract. She got the second one upon the delivery of the manuscript, the final product. She got the third installment of $25,000 upon publication of the book, which can easily take years, depending on the size of the publisher. If they're smaller, they can work a little bit more quickly. If you're with a big 5 publisher, like in New York City, it can easily take a year or more. And then she got the fourth installment 1 year after its release. So yeah. And when you're with a smaller press, let's say within the traditional publishing umbrella, right? You have small presses, medium presses, and big presses, like big ones. The big ones are all in New York City because New York City loves New York City. For small presses, like me, I was through a small press, unagented, which is a possibility and a really great entry point for new authors. You will most likely not get an advance, or if you do, it might only be a few or a couple $100s. If you're with a medium press, you might get a little something between, the upper hundreds, low thousands maybe. And then if you're with a big press, depending on who you are, what your book is about, your platform, your expertise, all that stuff, you could get anything from a 5-digit to a 6-digit advance. It really just varies because the size of the publisher is going to be proportional to the size of their budget. So that's a good way to think about it too. So when we're talking about a big imprint from Knopf, which is like a pretty major publisher, they probably have a bigger budget and they can afford to give Cheryl Strayed, who's got a successful history with writing, books and magazines and entries and blogs and all that stuff, they can afford to give her such a fat check, even if it does come in 4 installments. So that's kind of the reasoning behind that. Now let's say that you get a sizable advance, let's say $10,000 for example, just if we're being a little more generous. The question is, do you spend it or do you save it? And I'm going to say that you don't want to spend it all at once. In fact, the smart thing might be to take a chunk of it and save it for your own little marketing budget. The publisher, if you're kind of a newer writer, an aspiring author, you've got a very small handful of books out there or none at all, and you're trying to publish your first one. Your publisher, assuming you're going traditional, is not going to roll out this big fancy publicity campaign for you because remember, it's all about platform, who you are, what your status is, how much credibility you have in a particular field, how much influence you really have. I would not expect or plan on your publisher doing this massive marketing campaign for you unless you're willing to pay for it. Depending on how certain publishers work, they might be like, oh, hey, we're going to publish your book traditionally, which means if you publish your book traditionally, it's going to be free. There might be little packages or something on the side that you could opt into. I don't really know. It depends on the publisher. But either way, I would say keep a small chunk of money on the side for marketing. Maybe that's a couple $1,000s. It really depends on what your goals are, what you want to do. If you're going to, let's say, opt in to a service that provides book launching services, which is what my background is in, that could easily cost, depending on the company, $10,000 or more. It really depends on what your goals are. Okay, let's talk about royalties. The royalty itself is just little checks here and there that you get from your book sales. It's profit. And the reason for that is because when you are traditionally publishing, most often you are selling your rights to the publisher. So they're paying you for those rights in exchange for publishing with them, if that makes any sense. So that's like the easy definition and then the more like technical reason behind it. And the thing is, you have to earn out your advance before being entitled to royalties. If you're publishing with a medium or a larger press, you're most likely going to get an advance, let's say $10,000. If you make $10,000 worth of sales, you earn out your advance, then you are entitled to getting royalties. If you're with a smaller press, like me, I got published with a small press, you don't get an advance, in which case you are automatically entitled to your royalties. So if you don't have an advance, you're gonna get royalties. If you do get an advance, you have to earn it out or make that much money in sales before being entitled to royalties. So I hope that makes sense. How does this work? Like, how much royalties can I expect to get? Very, very typically, if you are going to traditionally publish, you can expect to receive 10% or less in royalties, which is not a lot. That being said, I'm very comfortable saying that you will not make money off book sales. It's just not a possibility. Unless, and here's where some of the exceptions come in, unless a celebrity book club picks you up, like Reese's Book Clubs. In fact, people say that if she chooses you for her book club pick, it's like the equivalent of winning the publishing lottery. In fact, if you're interested in learning more about how Reese chooses her books for her book club, I actually made a video on that as well as a blog, so you can kind of choose which one you want to, read or watch. So that's there for you, just in case you want to go down that little rabbit hole, which there's not a whole lot of information on how she chooses it, which makes it all the more interesting to me personally. So unless you're picked for a celebrity book club, you won't see much in book sales unless you go viral or get a massive shout out on Book Talk, for example, and you go viral. That's another way to increase sales. And the third way to really increase sales is if you get movie rights. You get profit from both your books and a cut from the movies. I have no idea what that would be. I don't know anything about movies or film adaptations. You might have to do a little extra research on that. And how and when you get paid, again, depends on the publisher. So much in publishing is going to use the word depends or technically, and this is one of those instances. Typically, you will get paid your advances every 6 months, which I know is very agonizing. It would be really nice if we could just get like a consistent paycheck, like monthly or something, but unfortunately that's not always the case. However, with my publisher, I am expecting to receive my royalty check this September, which is 3 months after my book publication. So that's half the time for me. So that's why I say that it depends on the kind of publisher or the size of the publisher that you're going with. That stuff should and will be spelled out in your contract. In fact, it always helps to get an agent for that reason. That's part of the appeal of getting a literary agent is like, yes, you have representation and yes, you have an increased chance of like getting a book deal and all that stuff. But part of it too is because they know their stuff when it comes to what's going to be in the contract. Are you getting a fair deal? What loopholes are in there? What share of, the profit are you going to get? It's also, if you don't have an agent or if that's like something that you're not even putting your efforts towards, you can sign up with the Authors Guild, which is like an association, a very well-known one, very credible, and they have lawyers and people on hand that are willing to look over your contract if you get a book deal. So if you don't have an agent, if you're unagented like me, that's a really great resource if you're wanting to get a second pair of eyes on your contract, if you don't really understand anything, or if you just want to have that extra security. The last thing that I'm going to say about royalties is the idea of profiting off your books. That's something that some authors are just not comfortable with. They don't like the words profit or money or royalties. It feels weird. It feels a little bit dirty. So if that's the case for you, it's going to be a bit of a learning curve. Or if that bugs you so much that you're just like, I don't even think I want to publish. I just want to write a book, have that be it, just publish it, and like that's it. If someone buys it, great, but I just care more about writing books. You might want to consider self-publishing. You might want to put a lot of your efforts towards blogging or newsletters. If writing and only writing is what you want your focus to be, then I would say self-publish or, find other kinds of mediums out there that resonate with you. Otherwise, if it's uncomfortable, but you're willing to kind of learn a bit more about it, that's great. That's a starting point, in which case I applaud you for educating yourself by watching this video, checking out other resources. But that's going to be like a hard mental thing for some writers and some aspiring authors, is just being okay with profiting off of their art, which is why in the beginning I said that it can be a little bit awkward talking around the money of books, but like anything, it's important. If you're at a job and you're talking with your boss and you're negotiating a pay salary or a pay range or something for you, if you're getting hired or you're in like a quarterly meeting or something like that, it's important to know how to do that. Whether or not it's uncomfortable for you, it's a good skill to have and to practice because, as I've said, like anything, books are a business and there has to be money somewhere. It's really important as early on as possible to identify what success looks like to you. And if money isn't a part of that, then you can just disregard everything that I said. That's cool too. Which brings me to the end of this video. I have a few final thoughts that I want to share, considering everything that we've talked about. One, it's going to be difficult to candidly talk about how authors make their money, or if you are an established author, how you make your money. I think it's good to create a dialogue around that. It doesn't have to be, hey, let's talk about the tax side of things. Like, it doesn't have to be that in depth. But I think it's good to have a little dialogue here and there around how the money works within books. It's important. It's okay to make money off of the stuff that you write. You know why? Because you deserve to be compensated for the time and energy and maybe even blood, sweat, and tears that you put into your book. Everyone has different circumstances, and I think it's okay to be rewarded a little bit on the side, even if it's financially. Number two, I would say that if you are publishing big, this is important to keep in mind. If your goal is to get a traditional, big, beautiful publishing deal from a New York house with an agent and all that stuff, you can do that. Keep in mind though, and I'm telling you this so that you know how to manage your expectations, if you go big, you are exchanging your book's rights and the money for credibility and prestige. If you're wanting to make money off of book sales, that maybe might not be the way to go. In fact, if you get a big publishing deal, let me tell you something. Readers don't care where your book was published. They just care that it's written well. I can't tell you how many New York Times best-selling books I've read, and it's like they're terrible. They're bad. They're just not good. But it's okay because they're a Penguin Random House book. But it's like, no, it's a bad story. It's not good. I hated reading it. It's in my did not finish pile. However, I will say that if you are a business owner publishing a nonfiction book, the credibility can help. Because if people say, oh, okay, they published a book and okay, that's a pretty good publisher. And then you see that they have a business, like that, a book in that case is more of a marketing tool. You can say, oh, I wrote this Wall Street Journal best-selling book published by Simon & Schuster. You can use that to your advantage in a lot of ways. You can raise your coaching prices. You can, use that for more speaking engagements. You can use that, you can leverage that in so many different ways because it's easier to make money around nonfiction books. These are a lot of important things to consider for yourself. With fiction, it's a little bit harder to make fiction or money around fiction books if you don't have like this greater, bigger brand around it. If it's a book club pick, if you're doing promotion here and there, if you're including it in your newsletter, that's all great. But I tell you this so that you know how to manage your expectations and create goals that most align with what you want for yourself and your book and the kinds of doors that you want it to open. So, with that all being said, I hope you got something out of today's video. If I had to give you a next step or a piece of advice, I would say to consider checking out that book that I mentioned called Scratch. The full title is Scratch, Writer's Money and the Art of Making a Living by Manuela Martin. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it. And if you got something out of this video, I would encourage you to like and subscribe if you feel compelled to. And I want you to comment below. What's something that you got out of this video that maybe surprised you about how authors make their money? Or maybe another question that you have that stemmed from this video. I would love to hear from you. And if you have other ideas for topics you want me to comment on or feedback you have for me, feel free to DM me on Instagram, or you can also email me at lauren@laurenericksonwrites.com. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful day. Appreciate you.